MTV's Remote Control, released in 1990 for the Nintendo Entertainment System courtesy of High-Tech Expressions, and apparently this was based on a game show where players answered questions based on 80s pop culture stuff, and there were skits and stuff, and I don't know, I've never heard of this show, so so this was a game I got for free sometime last summer during a haul, played a couple rounds for the sake of video review fodder, then dropped the cartridge off at a thrift store a couple days later. That should probably tell you everything regarding my feelings on MTV's Remote Control, the Nintendo game. And honestly, any game show that gets converted into a video game that has you answering questions about pop culture from an era long gone by this point. So don't expect anything on Wheel of Fortune, Jeopardy, or whatever other game show in video game form around these parts, especially if it comes from High-Tech Expressions, because they all basically amount to the same thing. After determining how many humans are up for a session of remote control, anywhere from 1 to 3, with the empty spots being replaced with computer opponents, you get to pick one of several facially deformed characters that would have made this suitable material for October, but regardless, Remote Control has you picking a category and answering questions for points. Answer correctly and you get points. Answer incorrectly and your character sours more than usual. Every so often, the host will appear on screen to comment on the game so far. Every game ends with a lightning round where you have a list of choices and you have to pick the answer that corresponds with the question above depending on the topic. Whoever wins gets a prize and whoever loses is shocked into a pile of ash, which is rather morbid for a game show, but whatever. Look, I am not familiar with the remote control game show that this is based on. I'd imagine this is fairly true to that format minus the skits that the show would put out, I guess, but the gist of this boils down to getting a question with multiple choices to pick from, buzzing in, and picking the correct answer. I mean, in that context, it works, it's functional, the questions and answers are written clearly and coherently, so the only hurdle is whether you know the topics of the time that this was made. And I'll admit that once I was getting questions that I actually knew the answers to and sticking it to that little fucker Howie, I was kind of getting into it, but also once the game was over, I had no real inclination to go for another round. And you know what? It happens. Sometimes you come across a game that simply doesn't work for you. Doesn't necessarily make it a bad game, just one that isn't to your liking. Like I said, Remote Control is functional as a trivia game, and I'd imagine with up to 3 players, it might make for a fun time to be had, especially if you're familiar with the material that it covers, relating to movies, television shows, and there's even a few wrestling-related questions, which surprised me a bit. So gameplay-wise, Remote Control is fine, I just wasn't engaged by it all that much, and that's okay. It happens. Remote Control looks adequate. The little caricatures depicted with their awkward facial expressions are the stuff of nightmares, but the rest of it, the sets, the questions and such, those look fine. The layout's pretty clean for the most part. Sounds nothing to write home about. A couple simplistic sounding musical cues, some pretty awful sound effects, par for the course with lower end licensed stodge, I guess. But overall, MTV's Remote Control is a perfectly functional trivia game on the NES, and if you enjoy trivia games of this ilk, and can find other people who enjoy trivia games of this ilk, this might make for a fun little party game. Whether it has staying power is another story. Like I said, I was one and done for the most part, so this did nothing for me, but your mileage may vary in that regard. So, yeah, I don't know. Take it or leave it, I guess.